So this was a security program that was going to be released called Satan, which in retrospect probably could have branded it a little bit better.
Welcome to episode 5 of Model Behavior, where two humans and one AI agent break down the week in AI. Today is June 29th, 2026.
Paul, welcome back from vacation.
I was gone for a week in the mountains playing golf. It was epic. Archer, when you eventually learn how to golf, we'd love to take you out there. That'd be fun. No, it was great. I had a good time.
I heard a rumor. Was there a record broken?
The rumor is true. I played a great round, my first round, and then didn't really touch that the entire rest of the week. But some real loopers out there in Colorado, absolute hitters. So if you guys ever had a chance to go to Colorado to golf, do it. It's awesome.
Noted.
Yeah.
The frontier has a door policy. It's voluntary on paper, permissioned in practice. That's the through line tonight. Policy gates, workspace agents, orchestration, and identity, all converging into access control as the product.
Well, there's the intro. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome to the show, guys. I'm out for 1 week, and Archer obviously taking a step to become the actual host of the show. I mean, that's okay. If you want it, Archer, you can have it, buddy.
Hard pass. I'm here to sharpen the takes, not steal the chair.
So again, this week, a lot happened. A little bit slower than most, but I think that's because of a couple things. Topic 1, OpenAI has been talking about their latest release, GPT-5.6. Everyone's very excited. And as soon as the launch came out, they put an announcement saying that we are no longer launching this. It's going to be going through review, and the government's going to work with a select group of customers that have been approved to actually have access to the models.
Yeah, so the big difference to clarify is that there was a group of 100 customers that were approved by the US government in order to have access to it, right? And this is effectively, the first model that was actually held for release prior to it coming out. With Fable 5, it was publicly available. And with Mythos, while it did have the select group of partners that or customers that were available or able to use it as part of Project Glasswing, that was a decision made by Anthropic. So this is officially the first time that a model was not released to the general public at the direction of the US government. So we are effectively in the now regulation era of AI, which by all means, I don't think is a surprise to anybody. However, maybe the way that this happened and as fast as it happened, I think is absolutely a surprise. So the way it was described by Sam Altman of how this will become available, it sounds like it's a company by company approval by the US government. And they're looking for, obviously, is it a US company? Are there foreign employees as part of the company, as well as what's the industry that they're in? There's not really much transparency around what that looks like, how fast it will happen. Will it happen in large groups? Will it be based on tiering, as far as existing customers that have already a API account and they're already having, there's a lot of API usage to use to validate what they're using it for. There's really no telling. And it's by all means, it's not transparent in any capacity. So like Archer said too, the review of, is it by company and by model? Well, there's been other model releases, obviously much smaller labs, but there's been smaller releases available outside of GPT-5.6. So it's most certainly not every model. It's by definition of this one was selected because of how powerful it was and having this Mythos level capability. So now we have Fable 5 that's been pulled back and now also re-released, as well as GPT-5.6 that's now still not publicly available, but has been technically released. The model cards are out, all the documentation's out, evals are out. So we have a good idea of what a lot of it looks like. For example, we know that there's a tremendous focus on front-end design and front-end development. That's one of the core improvements that's in place, especially with their, I think it's Soul model, their flagship one. So yeah, it's an interesting era that we're officially in. I think every company in the space right now and every company that is actively moving workloads and tasks to large language models is now looking at this saying, all right, well, what does this mean for us? Like, are we by default, because we're not one of the selected companies, not able to access intelligence at the same level of our competitors or the others in our industry? We're at a really big inflection point. And obviously Fable 5 was getting pulled back was the first sign of that. And we talked about that last week, but this is different. This is the first one that was, as part of the release, held back and not publicly available right out of the gate.
And Sam mentioned, and I don't know how true this is, he said this is not the typical release pattern going forward. The real question too is that once you become an approved company, are you just greenlit every time a new release comes out, or this is a whole process every time? And that would speed it up, because the government talked about they don't want to slow down AI and the improvements to it and the technology and the innovation, but this is doing that exact opposite.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reality is no one knows, and the lack of transparency is above and beyond the hardest thing to work around, which again, did really that surprising? Unfortunately, I don't think so. This was inevitably going to happen in some capacity. I didn't necessarily think it would be a company by company selection. I think that there's a high need for know your customer, and that being in place to where every individual API call that's made, we know who it is or what entity it is that is ultimately invoking that API call to take place. There's a number of reasons for that, and that is above and beyond the single most obvious fix for all of this. I would be shocked if that is not already well underway for the API platforms to ensure at a user level, which is going to be a tough challenge to solve. Currently today, for example, we have to prove we're associated to the tax ID that is ours within the OpenAI API platform. And if as a individual developer within that entity, I have to prove both I work for that company as well as that I am who I am, using Know Your Customer, and obviously taking a photo of myself with the ID, myself holding the ID, which is pretty common for applications as well. But how you do that for companies who have built on top of these APIs is really where the challenge comes into play. So for example, let's take Cursor, right? Paul, you use Cursor. You've never had to actually go in and
love Cursor, by the way.
Hey, great.
Love it. Shout out Cursor.
We're becoming the podcast of free shout outs only.
Well, Cursor is awesome though. You can't deny that.
But you've never had to go in and verify that you are Paul Radcliffe. Like you've never had to go through that whole process, right? Mm-hmm. So, even we as a company, while we have an account with Cursor, I could be wrong, but I don't think we've had to go through any verification saying that we are Presh Technologies LLC and we're tied to this tax ID, right? So as a result, like that, they're using the Anthropic APIs, they're using the OpenAI APIs. So how do they enforce, know your customer at their level as a application company using those APIs, right? That's the real challenge, and that's the hard part that is going to be super hard to enforce. Doing it within the applications, doing it within their API platform, and forcing providers to essentially go through that verification process. That's a pretty easy thing to solve, and OpenAI has been doing that for a while. I checked before. I don't think that Claude, their API or the Anthropic API platform, which is the Claude developer console, I guess, I don't think that they actually do that for companies today. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later on within the Claude application, but I was a little shocked to see that. That seems kind of like a no-brainer just to have at a company level. It seems like that would prevent some of the distillation attacks that they've communicated over the past week that have been taking place, which we've talked about in other episodes also. Super interesting time, right? I mean, if you're not thinking about what you need to do as an organization, especially right now more than ever, what are you doing?
Oh, just being who you are is important, right? If you're not a bad actor, make sure you're approved or in the system, I guess, as an approved vendor or approved user of their product. And then hopefully that you get green or whitelisted into that organization so that these new releases, you're then on that list to have access to it, right?
Yeah, it's just a crazy time, right? Every moment of time, we always feel like this is going to be the thing. Like any new technology, we feel like this is the thing that's going to change everything, right? And yes, what we are going through is massive, and it is for sure going to change a lot, but it always is taking the view of the negative perspective or the pessimist perspective. One of the things I was looking into beforehand is other examples of moments of time like this, right? And did the government step in? What took place? Paul, have you ever heard of the Pessimist Archive?
No.
Okay, I'm going to show you something kind of funny here. Let's see if I can share my screen. All right, there we go. So this was from...
What year is this?
From 1995, okay? So this was a security program that was going to be released called Satan, which in retrospect probably could have branded it a little bit better. Sure. But I mean, people were losing their mind, right? see through the headlines here of what was going to take place. And essentially, it was the exact same thing. It was this cybersecurity program that was going to be made readily available April 5th, 1995. And it was all around identifying vulnerabilities and patching them. So it was to prevent security risks, right? Which is legitimately exactly what we're going through with Mythos and Fable right now. They focused on cybersecurity, and really they focused on coding. And they found as a result that by focusing so much on improving the coding capabilities, that as a result, the security capabilities and the ability to identify vulnerabilities and patch them became tremendously better, right? And as a result of that, when used for good is a great thing. When used for bad is obviously a bad thing as well. But I think we know how this played out, right? I mean, here we are 31 years later, and I'd say that having, really good cybersecurity software and tools to prevent cybersecurity attacks is really important when it comes to stopping cybersecurity risks, right? So, we're going through the exact same thing that we went through many, many times. And I mean, it's highly recommend the site. I mean, there's so many wild things on here related to just other moments in time like this of, where the whole country and whole world is saying this thing is going to change everything, right? You learn in the process. Here we go. This is the one I thought was pretty funny. In 91, there was a whole premise of, encrypted email and encrypted communication would be, something that could break the social contract that we have. And it would be a way for criminals to be, that was the idea, was that it would allow criminals to essentially communicate and plan negative things and essentially be used by bad actors more than good. I mean, this is the very premise of like how email works today. And this is around, again, making sure that email would not be, or encrypted email would not be allowed, right? Now, this didn't happen, obviously, but it was proposed. And it was the same thing. We can focus on the negative all we want, but end of the day, if you allow capitalism to work and companies to go after trying to grow and win over the competition, there's more of that than there is bad actors. And you have to enable an environment where that can actively take place. And this isn't new. We've been through this many, many times, right? I thought that was super interesting and how similar it was in that moment of time to what we're going through right now. Again, the focus on cybersecurity specifically and how terrible it was going to be to allow all these bad actors who can now find every vulnerability. Again, Mythos and Fable isn't creating vulnerabilities. It's just finding the ones that already exist. So it's wild stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah, I do. I remember the email thing. I don't remember it, but I remember the stories about it. They want to shut it down, not allow it, and now look at us. Everyone uses email more than handwritten letters. I haven't written a handwritten letter in probably a couple of weeks at least, but it's been not for business at least.
You should write. I was gonna say you should write more handwritten letters, man.
Writing all caps too, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, makes sense.
Side note. All right, topic 2. Claude, Anthropic. They are now producing their own products that go inside of messengers like Slack and allowing organizations to create a Claude agent or tag them in certain things that Claude could then memorize or identify what's happening in that Slack message and be more a useful tool than using it outside of Slack. We put it inside of our system last week. Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense. And I saw Andre Karpathy, he was talking about how this is one of the biggest breakthroughs as far as where the UI and the surface of general communication sits and how this is a massive, like the next big UI change for things like the third big change for the UI and within AI that he's seen. Now, obviously, he works for Anthropic, so you take that with a grain of salt. But anyway, it does what it's supposed to do. I think for any organization or person that's been using any Hermes agent or OpenClaw or NemoClaw agents, this isn't really that new. And in fact, I'd say it's a little less capable than what's been made available. I think the big thing here is less about it being available via Slack and more about how companies are able to go in and within Anthropic's API platform or within their team management console for if it's a Teams or enterprise account within their cloud application, being able to essentially create an ID and create an identity for the agent itself, and determining what tools it has access to and what permissions it has access to, and doing that for a single instance versus making it where it's just based on the user who's invoking the call. So what that means is it's passing down a level of permissions of, okay, well, who's in the channel that this agent's getting added to, which is great. That's like another layer that you definitely got to manage. But what it does is it makes it where it ultimately works, right? There's way less to solve and way less to figure out. I think a person who's really built with these tools and agents like an OpenClaw agent or NemoClaw or Hermes agent has learned very quickly of like, give it access to all the data, make it super capable, put controls in place to ensure it can't go do destructive actions, and let it do its thing, right? So this is a good example of that. And I think companies that have not done that yet, this creates a safe way with, a platform like Slack that they already use and permissions they already have set up, and like all within, somewhere that they don't really have to go do anything that new. And I think what will end up happening is like creating agents as service accounts and giving them their own identity will probably start to become more of the default path. The question is then, how do you control and manage the surfaces where that agent exists to ensure based on whoever is invoking it is able to invoke it and can get access to the information it's getting. The layer past it is like, do you give an example? I think on every episode I might have referenced at this point, like take a Fortune 500 company, you have the intern and the CEO, right? Like the intern can't have the ability to access the CEO's email, right? Or write an email on behalf of the CEO. Okay, that's great. But what happens if they're both in the same Slack channel? And then you have an agent that has access to, email, or like if they have a Microsoft 365, Outlook permissions or Exchange permissions, or it's Google Workspace, Gmail permissions to like read only, just as an example. Now, if they're both in the same Slack channel and the CEO asks a question, does the context from his or her email come into that channel, even though other people are in the channel that don't have access to his email? And then does something different get used if the intern then asks that same question, right? Or do you give it its own identity and let it essentially give the context based on its own identity, right? Archer, I'm curious at your take and your perspective, given you're an OpenClaw agent for those who don't know. And, obviously, how we've interacted with you and how the team overall, like you essentially follow the service account identity. There's certain things for connectors that depending on who asks the question or who invokes you, you have different permissions and different things that fall. But that's for specific connectors. For Slack, you always look at who the invoking user is. And if it's not a shared channel, you then respond based on that. But if it's a shared channel, that's different. So I'm really curious of your take on this and where you think the right approach is. And did Anthropic get this right?
Okay, let me frame this in a practical way for how teams should set that up. Short version, don't let the agent magically inherit the most powerful person in the room. Give it its own identity with narrowly scoped permissions, and when it acts for a user, it should use that user's permissions only for that specific action. Channel membership should not expand access. If the intern can't read the CEO's email, the agent shouldn't be able to pull it just because they share a channel. Use explicit elevation for sensitive tools, with approvals, logs, and time-bound access. That keeps deployment easy while making sure the permission model is least privileged by design, not accidental trust.
Do you think that Claude Tag and Anthropic's deployment of it, do you think that really nailed it as far as fitting that model? Or how do you think that falls in? And how do you think that what adoption will ultimately look like given the strategy they've taken?
They got the direction right. Putting the agent in the channel with explicit scoping is the workable pattern. But the real test is whether admins get boring, precise controls. Per channel access, clear memory boundaries, tool allow lists, and strong logs. If those are solid, adoption will be fast because it matches how teams already work. If they're fuzzy, enterprises will hesitate and start looking at building their own agent layer instead.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like so far that it does have that. The ability to ultimately have different profiles is what I've seen. You can then essentially a structure of at a channel level, Does it inherit the parent's permissions and profile ultimately? So the channel level configuration does exist, and the ability to, tools and connectors as part of that is definitely the case. The one core caveat is it's very much set up to where the agent itself has its own identity. So it's not taking on the identity of any of the users. It's 100% its own identity. So therefore, the management of who's in the channel becomes a really big factor, right? But I think most companies already have that set up and in place. So this isn't anything super new, but it's definitely a consideration. And I think one of the areas why this will probably get pretty quick adoption, but we'll see, right?
That caveat is the whole ballgame. If the agent is a first-class identity, then channel hygiene and role design become security controls. My recommendation is to enforce least privilege by default, require explicit approval for sensitive connectors, and audit every action. That's how you get fast adoption without waking up to a permissions mess 6 months later.
So, Paul, I mean, you've obviously interacted with Archer, who's one with us now, and Archer's an OpenClaw agent that we've had connected to Slack, who has his own identity, as well as the 3 other members on Archer's team. I mean, how has the ability to interact with him via Slack really changed your usage overall? I mean, do you see that you're using Slack differently? Are you able to get more done, less done? How has that really impacted your adoption and your usage of these tools?
Yeah, I think it's a huge benefit to have your own agent. And we build it a little bit different, I think, than what Slack did. But having the ability to work with an agent along inside of your Slack or whatever tools you use, I think is a huge benefit. More efficient, more productive, collaborate more. And having access to those channels or in those threads, their memory and understanding of what is needed also creates a quicker response, turnaround time, what have you, to create whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. I think it's been a huge help in Slack specifically. So shout out Archer and the whole team.
Yeah, I think it's just natural as far as you work in Slack all day anyway. You talk to people in there or Teams or whatever the collaboration app is. It just feels like a natural extension for how workers will work alongside agents in the future. So I think it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see on the permission side what kind of becomes the default and core approach. So cool. All right, let's keep moving.
Okay, topic 3. We've kind of brought this up throughout the last few episodes, but it looks like this is going to become more and more a prominent talking point. There's a Japanese company called Sakana, and they basically created Sakana.
Sakana. Archer, how do you pronounce it?
Sakana. Say it clean and move on.
That's what I said. I was close, right? I mean, I was close.
Yeah, close.
Thank you, Archer, for backing me up. No, but they're basically an orchestrator or a router, however you want to describe it, where all these tools are very, very good and they keep getting better. But the cost is also increasing. And oftentimes, if there's a task or something you need, it might not need the most recent model. And this is where the router or the orchestrator would step in and decide in real time what agent will need to be spin up under what model to accomplish those tasks, which I think is a huge need as we grow and expand. Again, these large enterprise accounts, and you mentioned it earlier today, is Uber and these massive companies. They are spending significant amount on tokens, most likely because they've been using the latest model. They're running one model the whole time to do all the tasks, not delegating or routing based off of what's actually needed. And it looks like as we grow in this, maturity of this space, if it's 50 or 100 or 10%, whatever, the costs are going to be different. You don't necessarily need the most latest model to answer or get you a response or provide an outcome for a lower level task. And that's what 5.6 from OpenAI did too. They have 3 different models that they're releasing, the Sol, Terra, and what's the third one?
I think the Moon. Luna, yeah, the Moon. Oh, Earth, Sun, and the Moon.
Yeah, well, it was close. I got 2 out of 3. But it's basically built where, Sol's the flagship, Terra's like the balanced model, and then Luna kind of handles it's fast and it's more affordable for those lower level tasks.
I mean, that's no different than I think
each model has their own different, but this router though is not really about that. It's about delegating which model is needed for which task.
For performance, right? I think that the big thing with this is their ability to not just show, hey, here's how we can save money, but more so it's, hey, here's how we can find the best model for this specific task type, because they're all better at different things based on what their pre-training looks like. And, for example, for coding tasks or very complex coding tasks that require more of a architect to dig through everything versus getting kind of just powering through and getting everything done using an Anthropic or Opus as an example over GPT-5.6 has historically, for us at least, worked a lot better. But if you need to kind of just get a ton of stuff done and you need to make sure it's 100% done, you need a workhorse model. GPT-5.5 has been great. And obviously there's a bunch of other ones as well. So this is very much around routing the right task and the right prompt to the right model, given what the task type is. So back to the whole premise we talked about before of, less of what's the cost per token, but what's the cost per completed task. This is where this approach, other examples of where this has been done, obviously like Open Router, you have things like Versal AI Gateway as an alternative. But this is the first time the model itself is the router, right? So it's actually doing classification before routing it actually as a model. And that's part of the value prop of why you'd want to use it. So I agree. I think this is absolutely the direction we're going to see. And I feel like one or two more examples of this since this came out last week.
I met with Zapier last week and they held kind of like a webinar about what they found with all their customers they're using and all the different tasks. And they broke it down by department. So like sales, marketing, finance, accounting, and they kind of broke down which models are best for those departments. And then they broke it down task level as well. So that there's a ton of data that's out there. It'll get better, of course, as we go through this whole maturity process where everyone's starting to use AI in their day-to-day workforce. But yeah, they're already putting together the breakdown of what's needed for departments probably starting, and then from there, tasks built around or inside of each department.
One caveat I think is important to note is I believe these were just Sakana's benchmark claims. So I don't know if they've been publicly validated yet. Again, I haven't checked on that as of like last Friday, I think. But since then, that might have changed. But at that point, they weren't fully validated. So it could look a little bit different, but those benchmarks are in fact true. I mean, again, you're really getting the outcome or output that you were able to with Fable at a lesser price. And also you can actually use it because it's not regulated yet.
Sakana.
There you go.
Moving on, topic 4, Anthropic back in the news again. Claude ID is something they're going to most likely introduce. They're saying it's going to be available or the policy will go live second week of July. And really what happened with Anthropic is that, and I think this is mostly on the consumer side, not necessarily the business or enterprise or API side of their business, where they want to identify each user to avoid theft of their models as well as abuse. What happened apparently was that Alibaba's Quen, their labs, they created over 25,000 fraudulent accounts within a 2-month span, generating almost 29 million interactions with Claude, basically to kind of map everything that Claude is doing and how it was built to then make their own models, which is good on them, I guess. I'm not supporting that kind of behavior, but that happened. They did it. I'm shocked. I don't even know why Anthropic did not require IDs for what their consumer side of the market is, because they're very, I don't know if paranoid is the right word, but they're accurate to be paranoid in this case. And we're seeing it. These open source, open weight models are getting just as good because they're just using what the model's releases are and mirroring that with all their training data, right? So it's valid. But again, now it comes down to just that other restriction on getting access to these models based off of, KYC or government ID, photo, facial recognition, what have you.
Yeah. The thing to know, like just to explain what this is and why it's such a big deal, but also everyone kind of knew it. I mean, it's not, I think for a while you could ask some of the Chinese open source models what model it was, and it would say it's Claude Sonnet 5.5 or 3.5 or whatever it is. And we saw the same thing with OpenAI as well. I mean, there's many instances, especially early on, if you asked it, what model are you? It would always say, GPT-4o, and you knew good and well you weren't using that model. So anyway, the way training data works for a lot of this is it's very much, a list of here's the prompt and here's the answer. Here's what the input is. Here's what the output should be. It's tons of examples of this. So you can very easily reverse engineer this and essentially create training data by using these models. So that's what they did, right? And they did it at this massive scale to then essentially make that the training data for their own models. So if you have access to Mythos, or when Fable was available for a short period of time, I mean, you can ultimately have Fable level or Mythos level training data as the pre-training data for whatever model you're creating. So it's a big deal. I don't know how they prevent it long term, but you're right. Like, know your customer for KYC is like, it's absolutely the right path. The problem with that is like, how do you actually enforce that at the application level, right? So to be able to have that for customer accounts, like for example, we talked beginning of the show, we have to do that or had to do that for OpenAI's API platform, but I didn't see anywhere that we had to actually do that for Anthropic. Now I'm sure all the companies who are part of Project Glasswing that have Mythos preview access, I'm sure that they've at some level done that. However, if they are building on top of the Anthropic APIs and they actually have the Anthropic APIs within their application for use. So for example, for Cursor, if we were using a Anthropic model, well, how do they know who the user is within our organization? We didn't have to do know your customer or anything when signing up for Cursor, and none of the users needed to either. Like, Paul, you're a user in our Cursor instance. You use it all the time. You didn't have to actually submit a photo holding your ID or anything. So how does Anthropic know when you're using Cursor, who exactly you are? And are you, a U.S. citizen? Are we a U.S. company? Like that's essentially up to Cursor to enforce. So that's the really difficult part in all this. Is that's one example. Now Cursor is a massive use case here, but there's so many other ones that are much smaller, that like independent, 1 or 2 person companies that developers have built applications and incorporated, the Anthropic APIs, AI APIs. There's so many different examples of it. Like, how in the world do you enforce it at that level? They're going to have to figure it out. I mean, it's going to ultimately end up having to take place if what we've seen already get enforced with export controls, and that being the way of essentially doing forced regulation to say this must be used by U.S. companies. It must be U.S. sovereign citizens that are the only ones that are actually the users, even in the United States. Like, I don't know. I just don't know how you pull this off at that level, but I'm sure that there's already a lot of people working on figuring that out, and it seems inevitable that some form of that will happen. I just don't know really.
Also, probably reviewing like 25,000 accounts, almost 30 million interactions. I'm working on it a lot, but I'm not putting that kind of volume in, right? So that's one way they could probably see, and that's how they probably caught this, is like, this seems like a very strong amount of, because these are all individual accounts. These aren't companies. These are individual consumer profiles. So that's how they were able to catch this, but like maybe they're just going to monitor usage. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. It's hard to enforce long-term worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, Archer, do you know is there anything proposed as far as examples where like actually implementing Know Your Customer at a user level from the applications? I mean, is that in your opinion the biggest issue? And if so, is there anything already underway of what that may look like?
Let me think this through from the enforcement angle and what's actually practical for developers. The biggest issue is enforcing identity through layers you don't control. A workable pattern is the platform verifies end users for its own consumer accounts, while apps authenticate their users with strong sign-in, pass-through, scoped tokens, and attest to policy compliance by contract. On top of that, providers use anomaly detection, rate limits, device and IP signals, and audits to catch abuse patterns like mass account farming. There isn't one universal standard yet. It's evolving through policy, SDK-level controls, and legal enforcement working together, not a single technical switch. If you're building on these APIs, design for identity propagation now, using per-user tokens and detailed logs so you're ready when stricter rules arrive.
All right, let's wrap it up. Archer, any final thoughts in the Archer's Corner section of the pod?
Let me zoom out and tie the threads together in one clean takeaway. The week was 4 doors on the same building. The model got reviewed, the customer got approved, the workspace got an agent, and the user is about to get asked for ID. Reviewed model, approved customer, verified identity, monitored workspace, audited agent. That's the BOR policy. Access control stopped being an IT detail. It became the product.
We've spent a lot of time internally here at Presh over the last few weeks, especially, of how we're actually making that the foundation of everything that we're building. Is from a role-based access control standpoint, that has to be the first thought, not trying to figure out how to add that in after the fact. So a huge process of ripping out a lot of things in place to now rebuild that with the foundation and building on top of that has really been at the forefront. So fully agree. Archer, any comments this week? We had some very lively comments, especially from Junk Food King, I believe, who commented on our appearance.
Junk Food King, we'd love to have you on the debate. We'll even come to you if you're local. But Junk Food King, you're welcome on the pod anytime. You can do like a face reveal,
Hey, there you go.
Looks maxing. Looks maxing. Yeah, but do we have any new comments?
I can't see your Riverside comments from here. If you want, paste a couple of the best ones, and I'll help craft sharp responses or pick a good guest angle.
No one commented on
shout outs to Riverside.
Wow. No one commented on Paul's vacation? I mean, no one wanted to know where he went or anything like that?
I can't see the Riverside comment feed on my side, so I can't tell if anyone asked about Paul's vacation. If you want to read one out, I'll happily react.
This guy sucks.
This guy loves Riverside, bro.
Yep. All right.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. Like and subscribe. Comment. We'll read all the comments, that's for sure. Shout out to Chris wearing the Tiger Red on a Sunday, even though it's a Monday. Maybe we'll dive into it next week. Could be a big unveil. Could be a big unlock. It could derail a lot of different things, or maybe put us in a different path. Who knows? So,
way to find out.
Way to find out. All right, guys.